Yes, there is a disconnect, and I don't think just turning on a new digital tool is going to overcome the deep and ingrained sense of dislocation that many of us feel towards the EU, but also towards our own national governments and local governments. We're fundamentally disconnected from democracy in many countries in many ways. We've also got to be careful that we don't treat the EU as a single homogenous community, because it isn't. There's different reasons for distrust and disinterest in the UK as there are in Greece. The reasons in Greece are going to be different to Poland. So I think we have to stop trying to think of the EU as a whole, just as we have to stop seeing individual countries as focused on a single city or a single attitude. There's as much difference as there is similarity. So we've got to look at how we solve a wide range of complex local, historical, cultural factors and how they influence participation. So the disconnect is actually, it's not really about technology, it's about relationship to the institutions and to democracy itself. For democratic engagement, I think we can create tools to make the participation easier, but we can't create anything that's going to increase the motivation. That's a social process. So we can make things as easy as possible, but actually, as well as building the tools, what we've got to do is get people more engaged and more aware of what the opportunities and the benefits of being involved are. I think we have to be very careful not to see e-participation as something static. The way democracies engage with citizens is evolving and changing, not just as technology changes, but as distance reduces as well. So what we're seeing is that a number of nations are now maturing in terms of their democracy, and in some cases they're emerging out of recent historical conflicts. So I've been doing some work in Latin America, and if you look at the speed of democratic change there, it's very dramatic. And I think we can expect these countries to catch up and even leap ahead of some EU countries in terms of e-participation. And particularly when we look at Brazil and Chile, they are doing fantastic work. But I'm not worried about that. I think it's fantastic. I think it's good for them. And actually it's good for democracy. And it's good for us because we can look at what they're doing. And Brazil in particular has some quite different attitudes to participation. And we can learn from them. So this is fantastic news. I think it's a real benefit. So I don't think we should see e-participation as a race and think of where we are on a league table. We should just be looking around and supporting everybody to come up with new, innovative, good practice. And we should be learning from them. We can't really compare Luxembourg with Paraguay or Ecuador with Estonia. They're very different countries doing very different things. But we can all teach each other and learn from each other. So the more of us that do it, the better. I don't think it's anything to do with social media. I think the reason that it didn't really do very much was because European voters were simply not engaged in the European parliamentary elections in any big way. And the European Parliament, to its credit, put in a lot of effort and did a lot of work around digital resources to promote the European parliamentary elections. I'm not sure I particularly thought their campaign was that brilliant. It was kind of a little bit like it was all trying. In fact, the answer I just gave you about we've got to stop seeing this as a single body of people, and we've got to start looking at local solutions. The failure the European Parliament made was they kind of created one mass response campaign to why we should get engaged with Parliament. So it didn't really resonate with anyone, but it was a good attempt, and I think it was the best they could do with the resources and with the scope that they have. But the real challenge is how do we use digital tools as part of a wider strategy of education, information and engagement? How do we reach out beyond the narrow reach of the institutions that we have? Because if we just have the European Parliament telling us how important it is, people aren't listening. People don't hear it. It doesn't come into people's lives enough that they have a relationship with it. There are a number of really good projects around. I'm just going to pick one to talk about, which is a British project called NHS Citizen. NHS is the National Health System, National Health Service in the UK, and this is a project in England rather than the whole of the UK, and it's about getting grassroots involvement in deciding the strategic priorities for our public healthcare system. So it's been a massive campaign around designing a method for engagement, designing the engagement process, and going out and crowdsourcing what the engagement process is going to look like. So there's been a process to design the process first. It's not just we're going to do this, come and join us, these are the rules. It's very much had the public involvement in defining what it is. And I think that's a really good example because for me, the key to this is rather than a single campaign or organisation, it's about focusing on the key ingredients of success in these campaigns. And in the digital landscape, I think that's even more important. You know, we have to try and avoid the silos that we often create. You know, when we simply try and engage the supporters that we already know or can easily reach, whichever side we're on, we fall short and we leave a lot of people behind and disenfranchised. So governments and parliaments, when they ask for evidence, they get back the same responses. Campaign organisations, they tap into the networks they already have and they get the same people engaged. And that gets frustrating for the people that don't feel there's any route or channel for them. So how do we change engagement from appearing to be virtually a placebo? So when you sign a petition, you feel better, but nothing happens. And how do we turn it into a two-way process of conversation? And I like NHS Citizen because it's turned it into a much more deliberative process. And it's not problem-focused either. It's not starting with, don't do this. It's actually much more holistic and much more solution focused. So it's asking the question, what do we need to do to improve this? How can we make things better? What needs to happen to make it work? I really like that because I think we need to frame things instead of as a deficit, as a positive. And I think, you know, the key point in all of this is why do things like NHS Citizen or other projects that are a success work? And I think it's because they connect up the different and disparate parts of our democratic networks, and we only do that if both sides work together. So it's not top down, it's not bottom up, it's actually both sides working together. I think that's the key to the question, actually. It's the social and political factors that determine the success. We put far too much emphasis on the technology. I get very depressed sometimes, particularly in the UK, when I see another hack day or something to build an app. And all we're doing is we're building apps on top of broken processes. So if you build an app on a broken process, you simply end up with a broken digital process, and that's why they fail. That's why they really don't achieve very much. So it's clear to me that the factors that affect success are going to vary depending on what we're doing, when and where. But actually what they're about is understanding the transformative nature of e-participation and digital tools to change the underlying process to work better for people. And that's the real answer. These things work when they work for people, when they work for citizens. And the key thing there is digital lets us be transparent, it lets us be open, it lets us access things in more places more often in our own time. So that's how we do it. Digital lets us open things up, get at it, have our say, curate and control the conversation a lot better ourselves. But unless we change those underlying processes and allow collaborative models for redesigning those processes, actually we're not changing very much. Yes, they're almost completely overlooked. I think when we look at the major measurements or indexes of digital government, of e-participation or whatever, whether it's the UN or the OECD or even the global report on parliaments. We're focused very much on the institutional level. We're focused on what governments are doing to us, and they're measured against a benchmark of government-defined performance. They're not assessed from a citizen perspective. So that's the first problem. The second is when we look at the democratic landscape, we're measuring the public sector delivery. We're not measuring the civil society delivery. And that's wrong, because they're both critical parts of the same equation. Two things that I'm involved with that give me some optimism. One is the Opening Parliaments project, which has been developed by NGOs but is being embraced by parliaments around the world as a set of standards and principles that parliaments will accept and measure themselves against in terms of their openness, and that's both process openness and data and technology openness. So that's really positive. That also fits within the Open Government Partnership, which is the transnational organisation of just under 70 countries now, that is trying to look at how we transform governments to be open and transparent. And civil society is a strategic partner in that. There is a very, very strong focus on civil society and its role in holding government to account and working in partnership to deliver transparent government. Now, there's a lot of rhetoric behind this. Sometimes the actions that we see on the ground don't live up to the rhetoric. But it's early days, and I think it's very promising. So I think the answer is yes, we're really ignoring the value that civil society delivers, but there are signs that that's changing. Yes, I think there's a huge problem with the loss of net neutrality, and I think the large American corporates are just pushing and pushing, and frankly the American government is not an ally in this process. The American government is anti-citizen and anti-democratic. It's backing the private interests, and it's clear to me that European and US cultural thinking over the way the internet works is completely diametrically opposed. I think even otherwise rational Americans that I know simply do not understand why we in Europe get upset about Google. They just don't get it. They have been indoctrinated so much into their way of thinking that they simply can't see where we're coming from. And I think we're right to be worried, and we're right to be horrified, and we're right to attempt to avoid controls to put the internet on a footing based on profit and not on people. I think you listen to someone like Tim Berners-Lee, he's very clear. The internet is there as a democratizing tool. To lock it down into private networks and controlled bandwidth is wrong. And if we assume that the internet has become a critical part of our democratic infrastructure, and the social tools that we use are now the de facto tools for communications, whether it's personal, commercial, or democratic, then we can't actually step back and do nothing when others try and control and restrict and manipulate those tools and those networks. We have to act. So governments have to legislate, because corporations acting for profit can't see, and they don't care about the strategic picture of the damage that they're doing. You know, democracy is just far too important to leave to chance. Yes, I think my strong message to the participants in the conference is to remember that we can do much more together than we can apart, and we can do much more collaborating on making democracy stronger, better, more transparent, than if we leave it to a group of people who might have different interests to our own. With the tools and the networks that we now have, there's no reason why we can't make our democracies co-creating and collaborative. There's no reason why we can't actually involve everyone who wants to be involved in democracy. But to do that, we have to think about political education, information literacy, and access to the technology. We have to make sure that on one hand, we don't create this blossoming democratic opportunity. On the other, take it away by stopping people getting hold of the tools and the technology and having the skills to use it and the knowledge to participate. But for me, the message to take away is that the society we build together is always going to be better than the one that results from division.